At 6, the man who presented this programme for 20 years, George Alagiah, has died. He was 67. George first joined the BBC more than 30 years ago, working as a foreign correspondent before becoming one of the most loved and respected faces on BBC News. We launched the new 6 o'clock news together back in 2003. He went on to become this programme's longest-serving presenter. The BBC's Director General has called him one of the best and bravest journalists of his generation. We will be looking back at his life. Good evening. George Alagiah died this morning at the age of 67. He was at home, surrounded by all his family. He was diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer in April 2014. His chances of living more than 5 years didn't look good, but he defied all the statistics. George kept working here in the newsroom until September last year. He loved it. It kept him going. He was very proud to do this job. He was a brilliant, award-winning journalist, a great team player, one of the most respected people here, and he had an extraordinary career. But above all, he was a very fine human being, as his friend and colleague Alan Little will now tell you.
3, 2, 1, go take.
At 6 o'clock, the ground war on Iraq has begun.
Millions knew him as the face of the 6 o'clock news.
Good evening and welcome to the 6 o'clock news.
And for his calm, unflappable authority.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6.
He was born in Sri Lanka in 1955 to Christian Tamil parents. As a child, the family moved to Ghana.
This is the road.
And he was swept up in the early optimism of a young nation newly independent of British colonial rule.
We knew that Africa was going to be united and that Ghana and this country was going to be at the centre of it. I mean, I think that was a kind of dream.
At 11, he was a migrant again, this time to England, where his parents enrolled him in a Portsmouth boarding school. Here, though there was some racism, he learned to adapt to a new culture and to thrive. At Durham University, he met his wife, Frances.
I think when we got married, we were aware of a sort of meeting of cultures. You can see that in the wedding photos. We've got 2 sons, Adam and Matthew.
In a turbulent and often dangerous working life, she and their 2 boys were the still and unwavering centre of his existence, his solid ground.
And welcome to the Rainbow Nation. For just over a year now, South Africa has been my base as the BBC's Africa correspondent.
I knew George as a foreign correspondent. We worked together in Africa, the continent whose fate ran through his life like a thread through cloth.
So this is where your house, eh? Oh, it's nice. It's nice.
I thought of him as a kind of mentor. I was inspired by his example. He was brave, calm and kind.
Okay, you get the water from here and do that.
I admired his gift for reaching into the hearts of those caught up in war or natural disaster, winning their trust even at the worst moments of their lives. In a refugee camp in eastern Zaire, hundreds were dying every day of preventable illness.
I asked her what she wanted from life. A job, she said, so I can look after little Petty.
In Somalia, he met a woman whose 10-year-old daughter had just died. His own children were about the same age.
It seemed wrong to be there at what should have been a moment of private grief. She said it was all right if it might help to save her other daughter. I haven't the heart to count, and it doesn't really matter.
There were moments when he crossed the line between merely witnessing and actively intervening in the pain of others.
We took those we could manage to the French military hospital. At times like this, it's impossible not to cross the line that divides us, the observers, and those we observe.
The Rwandese translator we worked with then, Seth Ngarambe, told us his Tutsi wife had been murdered by Hutu extremists. But he was later accused of complicity in her murder and jailed. George wanted to know the truth, however painful, and went to find him in prison. The nature of their reunion, the power of it, says something profound about the George we knew and his extraordinary talent.
You're looking well, looking better than I thought.
Yes.
Eh? Come, Seth, can we go and talk somewhere?
Diamond, it's wonderful.
He even charmed men at the heart of Sierra Leone's normally secretive diamond trading business.
Look, this is the biggest you've seen all day.
Yeah.
The world of the so-called blood diamond.
This is something to write home about.
No, this is about $2,000, $2,500.
So you're in the clear.
So I'm clear.
In Ghana, he went back to his old school.
Somewhere in here is me. Go on. Yes? Well done.
He would later say that he was destined to spend his adult life in Africa dispelling the dream he had nurtured so carefully as a child. He was in Johannesburg in the Mandela years, a time of bright promise. Mandela, in his 70s, was about to remarry.
And now, sir, the future, you're a man in love?
It is a wonderful moment for me, as anybody else, to be in love.
When he returned to the UK, he brought to the studio a wealth of wisdom and experience gathered over years on the road. Though in the seconds before his first 6 o'clock news, there was some trepidation.
At 6 o'clock, these are tonight's top stories.
He was diagnosed with cancer in 2014. After a grueling round of treatment and multiple operations, he couldn't wait to be back in the tumult of the newsroom. He was deeply moved by messages of support and affection sent in by countless viewers he'd never meet. And on his first day back, made this small concession.
And I just want to say it's good to be back with you. That's all.
Off-screen, George was funny, clever, a generous and confiding friend, and full of energetic hope. There was something infectious about his optimism. You always walked away from time with George feeling better about the human race and the world in general.
And that's the BBC's News at 6.
The migrant boy whose family left Sri Lanka with nothing found his home in a changing Britain, and he took this country to his heart.
It's goodbye. The news continues, though, here on BBC One.
I watched George for years up close and thought this of him, that people wanted to tell him their story because in his journalism they saw the outstretched hand of a shared humanity and of solidarity.
Well, Alan joins us live now from his home in Edinburgh. And Alan, you did get to know him very well, didn't you, during those years that you worked alongside him in South Africa?
Yeah, and that outstretched hand that I referred to there, the quality that distinguished him as a reporter is the same as the quality that distinguished him as a really fine human being, and that was empathy. He had this great ability to put himself in the situation of others, and I watched him again and again in multiple situations winning the trust of people who were living through the worst moments of their lives. There was a word from the Nguni languages of Southern Africa that we used quite a lot back then in the Mandela years. It's Ubuntu. There's no direct English translation, but it carries the conviction that all human beings are bound together in some kind of shared responsibility for each other. Bishop Tutu used to define it as, I can never be rich if you are poor. I can never be fully free if you are enslaved. And I think that though the values that cohere around that word were George's lodestar. And I was a little in awe of him when I started working with him. He was already an established name, and I was trying to find my feet as a correspondent. And I came to look up to him almost like an older brother, somebody whose success I could enjoy without envy. And I hoped some of the values that he embodied and lived would rub off on me.
What really struck me about George deeply was just how he dealt with his cancer, because he had more than, 100 rounds of chemo. He said he'd lost count. He had 5 major operations at least, but somehow he remained really positive and calm.
There was that energetic hope about him, that optimism, and he was determined to bring that, as you say, to his cancer diagnosis. He once said to me, sitting in the garden of his house in North London, he said, I'm not afraid to die. I haven't got time for that. I've decided to leave all the worrying to my doctors and get on with my life. The one thing he said he found unbearably painful was the idea of his wife, Fran, being left on her own. And there was always that in George, others before self, especially Francis and the 2 boys, who were his bedrock, really. But yes, he brought that positivity to his cancer. And I went to see him 2 weeks ago today when he was still in hospital. And he said, Alan, if you haven't told the people you love that you love them, don't wait, just tell them. Because, what he said was that there is a positive side to cancer. He said, is it wrong to think there's a positive side to cancer? Because I've had time that you don't get with the brutality of a car crash, say, to think about my life, reflect on it, make sense of it, and say to the people that I love the things I want them to hear. And it was absolutely typical of George.
He taught us all a lot about living. Alan Little, thank you very much. And we will have a special tribute to George at the end of this programme. Now, we're going to end the programme tonight with a special tribute to George. 20 years ago, George and I launched the new 6 o'clock news together back in January 2003. He was a foreign correspondent at heart. That was his passion. But he felt enormously proud and privileged to be presenting the BBC's evening news. And he loved it. He loved being in the newsroom, being part of the team. And he made a good cup of tea as well. We all adored him. He felt a real connection with the audience too. After he was diagnosed with cancer just over 9 years ago, he received thousands of letters and messages from people who wrote to him as if they knew each other, strangers who spoke to him as a friend. He was really touched by your support. George was a man of great values, an indomitable spirit, a big smile, a velvety laugh, a great friend. I saw him just a few weeks ago. He told me he had hoped to come back to work one last time to say thank you and goodbye right here, live on air in the studio. He didn't get the chance, so we have done it for him. I'll leave you now with George Alagiah in his own words.
My life is, for what it's worth, is divided into pre-cancer and post-cancer.
You know, the weird thing about a bowel cancer journey is you don't really know the beginning and you don't really know the end. So I know the day I was diagnosed with bowel cancer, but I don't know when it started, because I was at the top of my game. I was having a fantastic time at work, at home, and suddenly you hear those words, "I'm sorry to have to tell you, Mr. Alagiah, you've got bowel cancer."
At first, when you're told, you don't know how to kind of respond, and it took me a while to understand what I needed to do. For me, I had to get to a place of contentment, and the only way I knew how to do that was literally to look back at my life. Actually, when I look back, I looked at my journey, where it all started, looked at the family I had, the opportunities my family had, and the great good fortune to bump into Fran, who's now been my wife and lover for all these years. The kids that we brought up, it didn't feel like a failure.
You know, I wish I hadn't had cancer, obviously, but I have cancer, and I'm glad of the things I've learned about myself and about my community, my friends and my family as a result.
I have got to a place is to see life as a gift, and rather than kind of worrying about when it's going to end and how it's going to end, I've got to a place where I can see it for the gift it is. I feel that gift keenly every morning.